But so the biggest thing that I think is really disheartening for people is to own a house that you go home to where you've got a mortgage on it, you've borrowed a lot of money in reality to get yourself in there, and then you go home at night and it's bloody awful. And so that was one of the biggest things we actually wanted to change, wasn't it, Vinny? Was to actually make sure that people go home to something that's really lovely.
So, do you want to take us back to the start? I know we were chatting about your kind of first property purchase just before, about how you guys got started in property and what the appeal of property is.
I think we got started in property really after the earthquakes, and I suppose what the earthquake did for a lot of us younger guys at the time was it threw up a lot of opportunity, and we got in and made the most of those opportunities. And what a lot of it at the time was buying what became known as whereas houses and repairing them and selling them. So that's what got us started. I suppose without that springboard we probably would have struggled.
And then in terms of meeting each other and kind of the formation of Brooksfield, do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
I actually worked for Ollie in sort of 2015ish, and we did property investment advice stuff, and it was basically through that we formed a good relationship. Doing earthquake damaged houses is like mini development. You're just sort of developing essentially one house at a time. You're fixing it and selling it, and we just started buying quite derelict houses on really valuable bits of land. And so we started looking at the projects differently in a sense of we could actually build 3 houses on here instead of doing this one house up, and with the same land you'd actually get a better return. And so that's how we started. And I have a building background and Ollie's more sort of property finance and valuation type background, and at first we definitely looked at it with a lens of how a typical property developer would look, which is just essentially how many houses can we get on here, how much are they going to sell for, and that's kind of where it stops, I suppose. And so long as they can sell them, that's the end of it. But I guess slowly, or sort of within about 6 months, we realised that we could be doing it a lot better. And so we sort of figured out actually looking at older buildings in Christchurch, and especially the Georgian colonial revival, which is like a 1920s, 1930s style that's really popular in Fendleton. Timber weatherboard, symmetrical windows, real basic houses. We actually realised that we could make our townhouses look like that, just with putting windows in the right place and doing them in weatherboard. And so that's kind of how, if you're looking at our product journey, how we started.
A question then, you talked a little bit about the importance of a developer has on a city and how they design a city. So for you guys in particular, do you feel kind of a responsibility for your developments? And then in terms of that responsibility, how would that translate into what people see in those developments?
Well, I think as a developer you do have a responsibility, because the facts are, as a landowner, when with anything you own, you can actually do a hell of a lot of damage with it. And you can create some really lovely things, but you can also create some really awful things. And the thing about property is that it's around for a long time. And so whatever you do, whether it's good or it's bad, it's around for ages. I mean, most buildings should really outlive us. And so we are very interested in building buildings that are going to look great for years to come. And the other thing about it is just it's a hell of a lot of fun, creating these things and playing with things. And as I say, you can really do, within reason, you can do anything you like. So you might as well do something great.
That's awesome. And then looking back now and maybe the first development, when you talked about taking that inspiration versus the most modern developments, what do you think your biggest changes have been?
Well, Vinny can't drive. Vinny can actually never drive down any streets we've built on because he's never happy with the outcomes.
I guess we're always improving the thing. We're always improving the houses, the product, in every sort of sense. And architecturally, I guess, is the biggest thing. But then, all the little products we put into the houses and the detailing and stuff as well. I mean, there has been no major changes apart from perfecting details since we began this journey of new classical architecture. Definitely, though, if I take you past the first one we did versus one that we finished last week, you'll see major differences in basically just in seemingly small things that make a huge impact as a whole. So window sizes, brick details, door sizes, door colours, roof forms, adding dormers into a lot of our buildings, how they address the street, all those little things. But like as a whole, there's not major changes from when we changed. But if you're looking at it compared to our very first developments we started, before we started taking inspiration from older classical buildings, there is like, you wouldn't even recognise them as Brooksfields. So yeah, they're just like totally different. Honestly, we were just being led by like consultants essentially, and they were just designing whatever like was going to fit on the site, and then that's just what we built. But really quickly we realised that was like no way to build a city, because houses have actually got worse since all these professions have sprung up. Just take Georgian for example. You go into any really beautiful Georgian city, so like parts of London, Bath, Edinburgh, there was hardly any professionals involved. You know, there was mostly just architects who are artists and sculptors and that sort of thing, and they were running the whole thing. Now that every single little person gets to like pick your building apart, it's just like eroded the quality of buildings massively.
But so the biggest thing that I think is really disheartening for people is to own a house that you go home to where you've got a mortgage on it, you've borrowed a lot of money in reality to get yourself in there, and then you go home at night and it's bloody awful. And so that was one of the biggest things we actually wanted to change, wasn't it, Vinny? Was to actually make sure that people go home to something that's really lovely. And so one thing we have noticed between our very first developments we did, when Vinny can bring himself to drive down the streets, and the current ones, is that people get really into them and they do tend to look after them, and so people look after their garden.
I mean, no one's gonna run a bloody spend all weekend running wires up the side of their terrible like black and white townhouse to grow a wisteria up it to make it beautiful, are they? Because it's just dog, mate. They're trying to get out of there. They want to go like as far away on the weekends as possible. But like when you build a beautiful building and people fall in love with them, they'll actually improve them, like Ollie's saying, and improve them. And like that's really nice to see.
One of the things
as well.
I suppose Vinny tried to create is something that people also get into. They don't just buy a house, they actually get into it and get a passion. And we find that a lot of our buyers, they get on our wavelength with the whole thing, which is actually really cool.
Humans love classical architecture. Most like people who aren't, you know, versed well in architecture, which is most people, because that's not their profession and they're good at what they do, they still like love classical architecture because it speaks to humans in the way that it's like proportioned and its beauty.
Well, the proportions and mathematical things is how humans are programmed, really.
Yeah.
Like we look at other humans based on various, we don't know it, but we're picking up measurements and things around people's faces and things like that. And so classical buildings are basically the same. That there's rules and things that you can't break. And so that's why some of them, when you walk into a building, they're really restful places to be, because the proportions are correct.
What is it like to start off as a business in Christchurch and then go national, when often it can seem like people are acting the other way?
Do you know, one of the things is we always like to go against the grain a wee bit, and a few years ago everybody was piling into Auckland, and now I think in a way they're piling out.
It's all about timing though. You can buy the exact same house and do really good or really bad out of it depending on the timing, right? And it's all like going into Auckland when you're not really properly set up to, for example, during an extreme boom in the market, is just asking for trouble. Whereas if you go in when everyone's
packing up and
dying, it's essentially the best time to get in there. And that's like the crowd mentality, and it is really hard to fight that, because you see everyone else doing it and you think, oh, like maybe I should, and you get the fear of missing out.
So we've wanted to make an expansion move for a while, but we just did feel, Vinny, didn't we, that it just hasn't been the right time. I mean, the classic one is people do absolutely outrageous things in a hot market, and they expect it to be around forever. And we were really cautious over that time, really, weren't we, with what we did.
Do you want to talk a little bit about here and the new site and kind of, you know, what you're excited for with Eliza's Manor?
I have a complete disdain for office. I think the way we've corporatised humans and basically shoved them in offices from 9 till 5 days a week, and then they have this life where they want to exist outside of the office only in the weekends, and then you go back into your shell and work for 5 days, I think is awful, and it's no way to live, but the world seems obsessed with it. And So I wanted for our staff, we wanted something different, really, didn't we?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
something
the
that
thing
suited our
people-
brand.
People go to work and they don't breathe fresh air for 8 hours sometimes.
Because a lot of these modern buildings don't have windows that open, which is absolutely outrageous.
So absurd. I mean, what has happened to the human? I mean, cows get treated better.
So anyway, we purchased this. This was originally a house, and then most recently it was a hotel.
And it was a school. It was actually a girls' college boarding house as well for a time.
So see, this
A
building here has
recovery
been-
building for the hospital and the influenza. Like, it's just being used for so much different stuff.
So many different things over his lifetime, and it's been reused and repurposed because it's lovely.
Yeah.
And so we have our office in here, and we love it.
That's awesome.
Do you know the biggest thing I would say about that journey is that you've got to use the youth that you have on your side when you're your guys' age. You only need to get 10 years older, like Vinny and I are, from, say, you guys, roughly, and everything's a lot harder. And one of the things is when you're your age, you guys probably notice this, is that people will let you in their door. And the most important thing is contacts, right? It's the people you meet along the way. Like, if I look back at what we've done, it's been significant people that we've met. Not that they're significant, it's been significant meetings of people along the way who we've met who have enabled us to do what we've done. And so the thing is, you've got to use your youth, because everybody starts trying to do it in their 30s. And by then every man and his dog's out there and is your competitor, that you really got to get going. And just be hungry and keen, and people love it. You know, the best business is actually, I think, pop out when you're not on the breadline, and you can actually worry about making your business great and doing, you know, really cool things, rather than just needing to make a dollar to get through that week and then to get through the next week.
It's all about your product or service. If you're a
Every
service-based
business is about product or service, and that's the other thing we see, Vinny, isn't it? It's people get that
So many
wrong.
people are obsessed with making money, and actually they don't think like, what is my product? What does the customer want?
Yeah, what does the customer want?
To be honest, we probably started out quite keen making just to make money. Like, I think that's what we thought business was about, was just to get out there and to make money, to satisfy your own desires and wants, basically, so you could live the lifestyle you wanted. But what we have actually found, that I suppose, Vinny, is that it's a lot more fun doing the other stuff, which is basically running the best business that you possibly can, and ours is so far from perfect. Yeah, but it's that journey is the fun thing, isn't it, Vin?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yes, I think the most important thing, though, is to be absolutely madly passionate about what you do. Otherwise, you're going to have bloody long days. Like, I mean, I don't really notice. I mean, Vinny, you're probably a bit like this as well. I don't really notice whether it's weekend or weekday or whatever. You know, I enjoy every day and have a lot of fun, but I've always set out to do that. I've never liked the idea of having a job and having the weekend and all that sort of thing. It sort of freaks the shit out of me. Yeah, and so I think the most important thing is to actually have a true passion for what you do.
The happiest people I know are people that love their job the most, and their job isn't really a job, and it's actually totally separated from how much money they make. They generally make okay money if they're really passionate about whatever they do, regardless of what it is. But like, that's not the highest thing on their list.
Pure money making quite quickly becomes a really empty thing. Uber Eats and Netflix is pretty mint, and it's $12 a month.
Yeah, that's very fair.